Welcome friends. Allow me to introduce, I am Mike Turner from the Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem and one of the conveners of the Heritopolis Globinar. It's Heritage in the Metropolis, an open-ended consortium, 21 university partners as part of the UN Habitat Metro Hub. These include 7 UNESCO chairs, 1 Category 2 center, 20 metropolises, 17 with World Heritage status, and 9 on the UN Habitat Global Sample. We were established during 2021 to explore how metropolises are being reshaped by heritage, redefining their meaning. This largest category of urban settlement is growing rapidly in number and importance globally. The UN predicts 1 new metropolis to emerge every 2 weeks over the next 5 years. Metropolises are beyond the city, linking symbiotically urban and rural with the tangible and intangible heritage. There's no conservation without creation. The architecture of today being the heritage of tomorrow, we are concerned about the role of cultural and natural heritage in the planning, design, and management of 21st century metropolises in the digital era. The Heritopolis Lunchtime Globinar, with 35 panelists from 90 metropolises in 3 webinars, will contribute to global reflection, each from its own perspective and geocultural identity. Here, the Shanshui of China and the Satayama of Japan provide us with insights for the interpretation of sustainability. It will provide, with all your active participation, critical inputs for reporting to the UNESCO Mondiocult and the UN Habitat Metro Hub, new approaches for future heritage. I take this opportunity of thanking all of our amazing consortium members and institutional partners, and wish success to the initiative and welcome the greetings from our sponsors, UNESCO and UN Habitat. Let it roll.
Friends, participants from all over the world. It is an honor and a great pleasure for me to convey to you the congratulations of the UNESCO World Heritage Center for organizing this important side event. The new heritage dimension for the 21st century, Globinar, organized by the Global University Consortium Heritopolis at UN Habitat, is a major contribution to sustainable urban and metropolitan development policies and to the discussions that will take place during the 2022 Mondiacult Conference in Mexico at the end of September. Within its mandate of heritage protection, UNESCO has always promoted cultural and natural heritage as fundamental enablers of urban sustainable development, and the World Heritage Convention has focused more and more its attention on the urban dimension of heritage with over 300 inscribed cities. In 2011, the UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape established a clear link between urban conservation and sustainable development, and has promoted an innovative approach to urban planning rooted on heritage. This vision has been further strengthened by Target 11.4 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, with cultural and natural heritage supporting safe, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable communities. On the occasion of the 3rd Habitat Conference in Quito in 2016, UNESCO presented an important report, Culture, Urban Future, where heritage, both cultural and natural, was proposed as a key dimension of the urban and metropolitan development within the new urban agenda. Building on this policy framework, as we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, and with growing urbanization, the Innovative Heritage and the Metropolis Initiative is addressing new multidisciplinary challenges of cultural identities in the coming century, highlighting the socio-economic transformation and new digital technologies. The Heritopolis Globinar is opening new perspectives that will assist the UNESCO in shaping its future heritage policies. I would like to thank you for this important contribution, and I look forward to receiving the results of your Globinar at the Mondial Cult Conference in Mexico.
After those introductory remarks, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Derek Wilding. I'm here at the University of Technology, Sydney. I'll introduce our panelists soon, but we have one more video that we'd like to, introductory video that we'd like to play for you. This is our contributor, James Choi, has provided it to us, and we'll play the video to start. Sorry, just one moment. Okay, everyone. After that video, as I mentioned, was supplied to us by Jaehyun Choi. Professor Choi is chair of the Geography Department and World Heritage Studies program at Konkuk University in Seoul, Korea, and a steering committee member of the Heritopolis initiative. Jay, is there anything that you would like to say at this point about the video and the survey that the video was based upon?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Eric. And I think the video tells itself about why the Heritopolis is so important to us. And I think that this is very meaningful meeting for all of us, because we right now starting the metropolis and the heritage, not separated one, but combined one together. So we have such challenges, how we deal with this climate change and the natural hazard and the resilience problems all around the world. So I hope that this meeting made a great sound, the foundations for the discussion for the future. Thank you very much, Derek, giving me a chance to speak.
Thank you very much. Welcome to all of our panelists and also our attendees. I'm delighted to be able to moderate this discussion. As Mike mentioned before, the Globinar is an integral part of the UNESCO Mondial Cult 2022 and the UN Habitat Metro Hub. This discussion will be the platform for reporting to UNESCO on future cultural policies and for Heritopolis, Heritage in the Metropolis, at the next 2024 World Urban Forum 12 in Cairo. Our emphasis today is on new heritage approaches and policies. And we have an outstanding panel of speakers to contribute, joining us from Yogyakarta, Seoul, Shanghai, Delhi, and London. I'm in Sydney, where I'm the co-director of the Centre for Media Transition at the University of Technology, Sydney. I'm based in the law faculty, along with my colleague, Professor Anna Philippa Brodoliak, who's the UNESCO Chair in International Law and Cultural Heritage. I also have with me another colleague, Lee Mei Saw, who is rapporteur for this session and will also give some concluding remarks. Lee Mei is a barrister specialising in court litigation, where issues of cultural diversity, particularly for migrant and religious communities, arise, in addition to environment and planning law. She's currently undertaking a PhD here at UTS with Anna. I'd also like to mention our coordinator in the background is Jana Das Chaudhuri, an urban heritage strategist, doctoral student with the Centre for Sustainable Habitat, Guru Nanak Dev University, and until last year, Deputy Director at the Delhi Urban Heritage Foundation in the Delhi Development Authority. Before we start, Lee Mei and I would like to acknowledge that here at UTS, we're on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We'd like to pay respect to their elders, past and present, and to acknowledge them as the original custodians of knowledge for this land. Just a note then also on the format of the panel, we have 5 speakers who will each give some introductory remarks relating to the countries in which they're based or in which their research is the focus. I'll ask them a few questions and I'll also encourage you to add questions into the Q&A panel on Zoom. We're not using the chat function today, but please put questions into Q&A. If we can, we'll deal with them when we have the introductory remarks from the panelists or at the end. In addition, today we have, besides the 2 videos that we have 2 videos specifically designed to illustrate some of the issues that we're discussing on this panel. And in fact, we're going to start right now with one of these videos, which will be briefly introduced by Dr. Xinyu Mu, Project Director with WITRAP, the World Heritage Institute of Training and Research for the Asia and Pacific region in Shanghai. Dr. Mu is responsible for the centre's academic research and for capacity building in relation to world natural heritage and mixed heritage. Xinyu.
Hi. To me?
Yes. Would you like to say a few words to introduce?
Oh, yeah, of course. Thank you, Professor Whiting. And can you hear me Okay, thank you. Thanks very much to Heritopolis. First of all, I would like to briefly introduce WeTrap Shanghai to you, located at Tongji University in Shanghai. It is a no-profit organization specialized in area of heritage conservation. Furthermore, as a Category 2 institute under the auspices of UNESCO, it is the first one that established in the developing countries. Our mission is to strengthen the implementation of the World Heritage Convention in the Asia and the Pacific region through training, research, information dissemination, and networking. Our institute has long been building capacity of all those professionals and the bodies involved with World Heritage Site inscription, protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage properties in region. We also have been engaged in promoting the implementation of many international agendas in the AP region, in particularly HUL and the New Urban Agenda. WeTrap was actively involved in the development of the recommendation and contributed to UNESCO report on the culture and development prepared for the Habitat 3 in Quito. Therefore, our work is closely focused on the cultural component of UNESCO, as well as the relation between culture and development, particularly in the field of heritage. Within the joint network of Heritopolis, we have carried out research on heritage sustainability strategies in the context of the Shanghai metropolitan area. It is well known that the size of Chinese cities is big. According to the UN's data bootleg in 2018, China has 6 of the world's 33 mega cities, and Shanghai is in the list. The Greater Shanghai metropolitan area unites 9 cities, spanning 3 provinces and covers an area of 50,000 square kilometers. Although neighboring geographical areas will have similar cultural traditions and share cultural identities, it is heritage that gives each place its unique historic landscape and appearance. The goal of our study is to provide the strategy at the scale of the development to make heritage resources fully support the sustainable development of the greater metropolitan area, while allowing for the long-term conservation of the heritage in the area, with full consideration of the authentic culture characteristics, heritage attributes, values, and their integrity of each region. The study covers a wide range of topics, so only the main line of thinking and the objects of conservation are presented in the short 3-minute video. Let's enjoy it together. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll now play the video.
At the heart of the Yangtze River Delta is located the Greater Shanghai Metropolitan Area, GSMA for short, which is made up by Shanghai and its 8 neighboring cities, covering an area of more than 50,000 square kilometers, whose integrated development is strategically important for China. The diverse and plenty historical and cultural elements of the area are spatially closely related to social and economic development. A new urban agenda acknowledges that culture and cultural diversity are sources of enrichment for humankind. Therefore, it's important to provide sustainable development management strategies for the integration of the GSMA. The Jiangnan culture is the cultural underpinning of the GSMA. For thousands of years, the dense network of rivers and lakes of the Jiangnan region has cultivated a vast cultural phenomenon of water towns. In modern times, with the rise of Shanghai's port and economy, the industrial and trade industries of the Jiangnan region gathered in Shanghai. Meanwhile, Western culture was introduced from overseas. Shanghai gradually formed a city with a unique Jiangnan culture and modern Western tenement culture. Policies were formulated to strengthen the protection of historical landscapes and promote the revitalization and utilization of historical buildings in the Jizma. In Shanghai Master Plan 2017 to 2035, the vision of a humanistic city was set out. In the territorial spatial planning of Jiangsu province, the government proposes to protect and inherit the historical and cultural heritage of the south and the north. In the territorial spatial planning of Zhejiang province, the government proposes to build a natural and humanistic demonstration zone. In villages design, full consideration is given to ecological environment, village layout, rural landscape, and open space. The planning of historical and cultural conservation and utilization is oriented towards revitalizing historic heritage, passing on spatial genes and presenting comprehensive values. In terms of ecological space, the aim is to create an ecological environment in which humans and nature can coexist harmoniously. Ecological landscape consists of 6 aspects: biodiversity, river and lake landscape, woodland landscape, farmland landscape, urban and rural parks, and recreation system. Construct an ecological pattern of harmonious coexistence between human beings and nature. Create a living scene combining Jiangnan charm small town flavor and modern style. Create a green, efficient, and diversified comprehensive transportation system.
Okay, thank you very much, Xinyu, and that's the videos provided a great introduction to our first panelists. So we'll move on to our panelists now. Professor Ying Jin is Professor of Architecture and Urbanism in the Department of Architecture at Cambridge University and Director of the Martin Centre for Architectural and Urban Studies at Cambridge. He's been working on the planning and development of the Yangtze River Delta since 1991. Ying, can I ask you to give your introductory remarks?
Thank you very much, Derek, and very good to join this Globinar. And I'm very pleased to see the video about the Yangtze River Delta or the Jiangnan area. And it looks to be an excellent effort to examine issues of natural and cultural heritage from a massive region of 9 cities, right? And this is a rather rare perspective in many ways, and is much to be commended. Although an area of 50,000 square kilometers is very large, and admittedly is a kind of a small country size, coordinated conservation efforts at this scale have good precedents and good examples in the world. For example, Switzerland has a land area about 40,000 square kilometers, and Denmark has 42 square kilometers. Both have achieved a great deal in natural and cultural heritage protection and conservation, and they've also produced something that is distinctively Swiss and Danish that are internationally recognized. And I very much hope that the Yangtze River Delta, the Jiangnan area, would do something similar in the future. Of course, the metropolitan scale heritage work has a long way to develop yet. At present, for example, in this region, the regional spatial planning and urban master planning are carried out for each city or province within the Yangtze River Delta, naturally, because this is to do with the local governance. the associated local laws and regulations for planning, design, construction, and heritage protection have evolved largely in a locally specific way, responding to the different local priorities, either of a village or a town or a city. And this is all very natural. However, this region has also a shared strong common identity, united by the Yangtze River basin and the Delta culture, which I hope will help this effort grow and to form more of a consensus of a coordinated regional approach. I very much hope that the Shanghai colleagues will be able to compare notes with those in other countries in Asia, in Pacific region more widely, and also the wider world, to develop exemplary approaches for metropolitan scale heritage work. Thank you very much, Derek.
Thank you, Ying. Just maybe if I could ask you a question about what you've just covered. You mentioned that policies and approaches might tended to have been local in nature. Are there any that you would regard in the Yangtze River Delta area or Shanghai or indeed elsewhere in China that that you think have been quite successful, that you would note for their effectiveness?
Well, over the past 30 years, the area has developed a really distinctive transport network, which enabled people to move freely and then to work in different regions and to get people from one province to see another province, the two provinces and a big provincial level city, which is Shanghai. And that itself actually has both increased the understanding of the different local cultures and also highlighted the need for developing something unique in each of these areas.
Right, okay, thank you. Just to follow up on that, if thinking about, I suppose, a couple of the issues that were raised in the video and that we're concerned with here, you've been working in this field and particularly in relation to that area since 1991. I wonder, do you think there are new approaches that are being developed that deal with the kind of the contemporary environment, the kind of digital era, that changes in work patterns, etc., that are emerging that we might take account of?
Yes, but what I want to highlight is that even in the digital era, the most key element is the people, and it's really to engender the consensus among colleagues of different regions, and which is really important. Without having that, that is the most important element. And here, the more work to be done in law, in the conservation regulations, and how to harmonize them between different regions will be particularly important. And here, I note that there are colleagues who here have actually worked a great deal in that area. And I very much hope that the Shanghai colleagues will actually compare notes with people like that, and particularly to make sure that the human relationships develop well in the digital era.
Great. Thank you very much, Ying. We might leave that there, and we might come back to China in some questions later if when we go to our audience. We might move on now from China to Indonesia, a different kind of metropolis, and welcome our next panelist, Professor Windu Nurianti. Professor Nurianti is in the Department of Architecture and Planning, University of Gajah Mada. in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. She's a former Vice Minister of Education and Cultural Affairs, the Ministry of Education in the Republic of Indonesia. In 2021, Windu was appointed as an official juror on the National New Capital Commission, charged with overseeing the design of the new capital being established in East Kalimantan. Windu will be addressing the role of government in policy-making and urban conservation, looking at the case study of Jakarta's Heritopolis. Windu, over to you. I think you're still on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Derek, for your nice introduction. And good morning, colleagues, friends, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to policy making in urban conservation for the case study of Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, as a Heritopolis. So, as you well know, Jakarta is the capital of Indonesia at the present, and very soon we'll be moving to Borneo, the eastern part of Kalimantan. So now it's in the process of transforming from the present capital to the future capital. So that will be interesting to see. So since after the independence from the colonial power, the Netherlands, in 1945, Jakarta has been transformed into the modern city of the 11 million people just in the center alone. If you count the Greater Jakarta, there will be 30 million people. And as of 2020, which was in the world, and it is projected to be the largest with 38 million people by 2030. So as you can imagine, the tension, the conflicting between the growth of the urban infrastructure as a capital, the population and stuff, with the balance of the effort of the preservation, protection of the important heritage, both heritage. So, well, if I look at the history of the government policy making, put for the heritage, build heritage and tangible culture heritage, there are three stages that we can learn here. The first one is that the first 20 years, the stage of one or stage for the first stage is that all the policy making focusing only on the individual old building. So then only after that, 20 years after that, the protection efforts toward wider space for about 10 years ago, that the policy making, including the ICH or intangible culture heritage, as an intertwined process for the build heritage. So ICH activities here in Jakarta and Indonesia as the whole. Now we have the convention, we have the inscription system, registration system, protection system, not only in the national level, but as well as the provincial and the lowest level in the district level. So up to now, only within 10 years, we had already more than 1,500 ICH inscribed in the national level. And in Jakarta alone, we have more than like 30 or 35 items. Among that, 12 items of ICH has been inscribed in the by UNESCO. So just to make summarize for my short presentation, what is the lesson learned here? The first of all, in the scale of policy making for Heritopolis, such a big Heritopolis like Jakarta, I think there are three main areas that need to be focused. First of all, is that the role of government is still the key. So role of government is still the key. And the number three is only recently that the role of the millennials is essential to ensure that the cross-generational interpretation to be capitalized as a culture and creative industries to communicate values not only to the past but within the present and the future. So as you can see, the tension, the conflicting, and between the effort of development, infrastructure development as a capital, and the protection of built as well as intangible cultural heritage are very challenging here. So I think that's it for my presentation. I'm happy to answer if there is any question or if people interested in the PowerPoint presentation. I can email you, or the committee also probably will be able to email you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Wenda. Can I just ask you a question or two, and then we had some trouble.
Your voice is breaking up. I cannot hear. Your voice is breaking up. Please, could you repeat again?
Yes. Would you mind turning off your video and just leaving audio?
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Great. Okay, hopefully that might be a bit better. So you mentioned the importance of the role of government, and I wonder, is the development, the establishment of the new capital, which obviously is an important moment for government, does that present new opportunities for protection of cultural and natural heritage in a way that you might not have seen in relation to Jakarta? Is there a possibility to plan from the outset, or are those difficulties that you mentioned in terms of the tensions between development and heritage, are they still there?
Yes, there is a opportunity to have the laws, regulation, and the protection since the beginning of when the capital is start up, like now, because before, as you know, the Jakarta just started from the little fisherman village, and now if you compare with the new capital, now started with the forest city. So in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of the forest. So therefore, the protection of natural heritage become the main guideline for the whole new capital framework in terms of design, in terms of the city planning, etc. So I'm very sure that all the layer of the laws, also the protection in the highest level of the undang-undang, we call it like the decree, will be in place. Because of that, we aware the importance of the sustainability in the new capital, learning from the past.
Right, thank you. And hopefully we'll come back to that point about the levels of
thank you.
Rulemaking. One final question for you. Tangible cultural heritage. And I just wonder if there's anything you can say about any examples or initiatives for recording intangible cultural heritage in Indonesia and in Jakarta, for example, around performing arts or some other form of intangible cultural heritage.
Yes, only 10 years ago, it's in the year of 2012, that's the first of the first laws and system of the intangible cultural heritage in place in Indonesia, and start by having the highest, the national, something like convention team for the intangible cultural heritage, working on the criteria for the inscription, the criteria of the hierarchy of the inscription, because we have such a big population and big, like 34 provinces with more than 650 districts. And all the ICH system of the registration, protection, inscription has to be hierarchically acceptable. So therefore now the system already in place, and the involvement of the community is very active in this case, plus the local government as well. So we have, I think, very positive result as the law enforcement, as the law protection for the ICH, even though compared to the Bill Heritage is like very late, only like 10 years ago, but I guess it's really better than nothing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And on that topic, we're going to our next who will help us explore that aspect. So we're going to move on to Dr. Ji-Hoon Kim from Korea. Ji-Hoon is Senior Program Specialist with the Korean National Commission for UNESCO and an adjunct professor in the Graduate School of World Heritage Studies at Konkuk University. Since 2006, she served as an advisor to the central and local governments of the Republic of Korea on cultural heritage and international cooperation. Ji-Hoon, over to you.
Thank you, Derek, for giving me the floor. This is a great honor for me to join this side event for the Mondial Cult together with the Heritopolis initiative. Following the discussion concerning the intangible cultural heritage elements at the local government, the case of Indonesia is very interesting, but let me share with you some ideas from the Korean experience, as well as the survey that was recently done by Heritopolis concerning intangible cultural heritage asset at the local government. Well, actually, according to the Heritopolis survey, the value of intangible cultural heritage has been well acknowledged, but not protected properly. In particular, many Asian countries that experience rapid economic growth or tend to marginalize intangible cultural heritage. That means, although the survey introduced the example of Seoul concerning their efforts to provide wider opportunity for citizens to experience traditional culture like Indonesian government and local government did, which was shared by India just now. But in general, intangible cultural heritage is more difficult to incorporate into a system based on the planning of the physical environment at the local level. So that is the fundamental limit concerning the protection of intangible cultural heritage. However, I believe it is very important to acknowledge intangible cultural heritage as an opportunity at the local level, because it is a source for boosting local identity, ownership for the local residents, and also it is a motivation for many creative industry related to intangible cultural heritage. And also it is a very nice tool for international cooperation as well. So there are several examples from the Korean cities. For example, I think this is very popular method of promoting intangible cultural heritage at the local level. I mean, using the festival for the development of the local economy. So there is a very representative city in Korea, like such as Gangneung City. They are using the intangible cultural heritage elements inscribed onto the UNESCO list as a big festival, involving the local residents as a member of the festival, organizing committee. So it is a very big festival, and using that opportunities, the local economy got boosted a lot. And also there's another effort by the local government, like for example, Icheon City, famous for craft industry. The initiative of the local officers, the local government officers, to do research about their asset, intangible cultural heritage asset, as the source for the industry is well found. So it led to their city as a member of the UNESCO Creative City Network. So using that network, they could enlarge their international cooperation as well. Actually, the intangible cultural heritage elements is a really good tool for international cooperation because, I'm not sure many of you are aware of the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage listing system. Like World Heritage, it has a joint nomination. So basically using that intangible cultural heritage elements, many cities having the intangible cultural heritage within them can exchange, a bit different but similar element of intangible cultural heritage. So they can learn each other, and it really forms the global citizenship for the local residents. I'd like to emphasize the importance of the governance for intangible cultural heritage. Indonesian cases just been shared by Windu was really nice because the local government have some can enlarge their efforts to involve the local residents concerning the intangible cultural heritage system. But actually in Korea, there was a new law concerning the intangible cultural heritage, which was enacted back in 2015, but it is lack of the participation of the local residents into the governance system. So that is something should be improved in Korea because, compared to the World Heritage, which have a really tangible thing to focus on, intangible cultural heritage is really hard to have some kind of the integral things to bring residents to work together. So since it is really intangible, I think the system needs to support for local residents to work together. So I think that is something should be done by the Korean government and the local governments to involve further participation of the local residents. This is initial ideas of mine to share with you all. Thank you, Derek, and all for listening.
Thank you very much, Jihyun. That's a really useful point about bringing residents in and contributing. I think one of our other speakers will be addressing that, so maybe we'll come back and bring you in at that point. I just wanted to ask about, you raised the point about international cooperation also at that higher level being quite important. What about, are there some, I imagine that there are some challenges or some barriers through competitiveness that you might face with neighboring countries, and have you found ways of perhaps or forums for overcoming that kind of competitiveness?
You raised a very interesting question. I'm not sure many of you are really familiar with the political situation in East Asian countries in particular, among China, Japan, and Korea. It's true that those three countries share lots of similarities concerning intangible cultural heritage, but it is really regretting that World Heritage is a tangible one, so it has a really clear territorial lines, right? However, the intangible cultural heritage doesn't have any territorial line, which means that it seems like we can cooperate more than like those World Heritage things. But it's true that the intangible cultural heritage also has some territorial lines, which means that those countries are always calling for the ownership concerning intangible cultural heritage. So it's true that there is a competition. So it's really regretting because I personally believe that, for example, like I mentioned the Gangneung city as an example for the festival. It shares that Dano festival with China as well. But when Gangneung city nominated the Dano festival onto the UNESCO list, there was a huge, the anti-sentiment from China saying that Dano festival is Chinese one, not Korean one. I believe that, we share the really, lots of tradition between two countries. So we could do some joint nomination, but actually at that time, the UNESCO convention was not adopted yet. So there wasn't any, like system for joint nomination. But I believe, joint nomination system should be further promoted, and then those countries feeling some competitiveness concerning the nomination could work together. So Korean government is also trying to do some communication with the neighboring countries, and I believe if there isn't any very sensitive political stuff behind, then those three countries can work together. Thank you. Derek, you are muted.
Sorry, yes. Thanks very much, Jihan, for for that positive note underlying what can be a challenge. As I say, we'll come back to that point about the earlier point you made about involving local residents in a moment. Now we'll move on to our next panelist, who's going to give us some reflections on specifically about India and the region. So our next panelist is Gurmeet Rai. She's a conservation architect and founder director of the Cultural Resource Conservation Initiative. She's a leading advisor across India, Nepal, Myanmar, and several countries of Southeast Asia, and has been a consultant to UNESCO Asia Pacific and World Monuments Fund New York. In 2021, she was appointed as Heritage Specialist for Conservation Planning for the Parliament Building in New Delhi. She'll be addressing policy for historic cities in India and learning from the past towards climate resilience. So Gurmeet, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Derek, and delighted to be on this platform and really honored. And it's quite an interesting to be towards the second part of the presenters, because one hears what is happening in the other countries and in the region. So one kind of sees the commonalities, of challenges and approaches and so on. Talking about India, there was a brief glimpse about that there was a glimpse about Delhi in the video that you shared at the beginning. So that brings my presentation to focus on Delhi as well, at the same time as while I speak about other cities in the country. So as you may already be aware, that India has a legacy of over 100 years of, on protection of monuments. And this is a colonial legacy. And I would like to underline that we have instruments of protection of monuments, which is a colonial construct. Also the fact that protection of cultural heritage in India is at two levels. At the national level by Government of India, the federal government, and the other is at regional level, what we call as the state governments. Whereas it's important to understand here that urban development is not a national subject, it's a state subject. So with all the initiatives of Government of India, their intervention or advice to state governments can only happen through funding, incentivizing sensitive urban development and so on. It cannot be prescriptive. Whereas in cultural heritage, when we look at all the international instruments of UNESCO, India being a state party, all World Heritage nominations, whether it is monuments or whether it is historic cities, which happened in the case of Jaipur and Ahmedabad. Jaipur in Ahmedabad in 2017 and Jaipur in 2019, the nomination goes from Government of India. So that's the platform where the state and the center have a dialogue, because the nomination has to go from Government of India. In terms of Creative Cities Network, there are several cities on the list, which are inscribed on the network. So Jaipur, Srinagar in craft, in creative industries, Hyderabad in gastronomy, Varanasi in music, and so on. So on the outset, it looks all very nice that, all these instruments are used, and, India is kind of very much up to speed with what the international thinking is. But I would also like to flag here that in the recent times, Government of India, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has, for the first time, Government of India has in its 75 years of independent India, which we are celebrating this year, it was only in 2015 that heritage agenda was picked up by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. And a few programs were brought out on the international level. And like I said, it was all funding driven and hand-holding the state governments and trying to urge them, coax them, all of that, to think of these very, very important issues which are being discussed globally about resilience, about inclusive cities, and so on. And cultural heritage as part of the narrative of urban development. So one of the big programs, highly endowed, was the smart cities. So so you had to be a city of over 1 million people to be listed as to be part of this program, and of which it is very interesting. The citizens of those cities had to vote in that which were the areas that they want upgraded, improved, and so on. And out of the 100 cities, 38 cities identified the historic core to be the zone where they need to upgrade infrastructure and improve the quality of life. So that was a very interesting one, because if you look at Ahmedabad or Jaipur or Delhi or wherever, whichever the big cities that come to your mind, 38 out of 100 were actually historic cities where people kind of requested the government to make investments in. There are other programs of Government of India. There was in 2015 another program called Hriday, which stood for National Heritage City Development and Augmentation Program, where 12 pilgrimage cities were identified for intervention around historic areas. But what brings here, what I would like to now, the other side of the coin is what happens at the state government. What happens with the urban local bodies where the capacities do not exist or exist to a very low level of planning as a, as I would say, as a tool for what you want to achieve, in terms of sustainable cities, in terms of looking at climate resilience or inclusive planning and so on. So what I would like to flag here is that there are very, very limited capacities at that level. Planning in India, in these states, if you go beyond into the backwaters, beyond the capital cities, are largely done by engineers. And this is where I would like to flag the role of bilateral and multilateral organizations. There's a sense of urgency here that infrastructure needs to be improved. So water supply, sewerage, waste management, and so on. Where is the funding coming from? The funding is coming from the World Bank, from the Asian Development Bank, and so on. Recently, I've been, I'm part of, I would say, as a heritage expert, just to illustrate the point, in the state of Rajasthan, which of course has one of the most iconic monuments of medieval India. Since 2 decades, there's been a program called the Rajasthan Urban Infrastructure Development Program. In the 1990s, it began with the large metropolitan cities, and by now, with the multiple cycles, they've moved into the smaller second-tier cities. The whole approach here is that infrastructure needs to be upgraded, more specifically related to water. I've been asked to participate as a consultant appointed by ADB, is to review some of the projects which are listed as city beautification projects. And I was amazed at the wisdom of the urban local body that they identified the historic water structures to be beautified. Now that's where the contradiction is. You've got water bodies, they've identified as important, but they want them to be beautified. What is actually happening is, what comes to my mind is the colonial legacy, because in their beautification language, they have forgotten to recognize the traditional knowledge of what was, this is just to illustrate what was instrumental or foundational in the establishment of these cities was water management, because this was a desert. Now today, the urban departments want to come in and put concrete walls and do whole kind of, I mean, I shudder at when I look at what they want to do on these water bodies and the kind of embankments they want to create, which are going to have such huge carbon footprints. So the intention is good, but the output and the outcome is going to be counterproductive. And that's where I would like to flag the role of multilateral and bilateral agencies in ushering in a reform, because that's where the policy can be done. The organization that actually brings in the money everybody's going to listen to that organization. So while Government of India can do policies, can do fund little projects or programs, they cannot be prescriptive at the mass level, because it's not a state subject. So the collaboration between international bodies and local governments and the national bodies to bring in reform, because there's a sense of urgency. Cultural heritage, I mean, the fact that, I mean, as a practitioner, I see a sense of urgency of working with culture and nature together, with people and with the tangible heritage. And when you look at the kind of populations India is groping with, or maybe the subcontinent is, there's a sense of urgency, and we have to really, the international language of nature, culture, coexistence is needed so urgently. And I would use this platform to urge the bilateral and the multilateral and bilateral agencies quite a bit, that we have a sense of responsibility, or you have a sense of responsibility here. We need reform on the ground if we really want resilient, inclusive, sustainable cities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gurmeet. That's very interesting. You say that that funding has, I suppose, had some limited effects, given the inability of the federal level of actually requiring things to be done. And you gave the example of policies being developed by engineers, for example, rather than planners or architects and others working in the area. Has the supply of expertise by the federal level to the state level been attempted, apart from just funding, or would there be a resistance to that? I'm imagining it must be very difficult to get any degree of consistency across different states.
Derek, it's interesting that you've asked this question, because I'm involved with an organization that I saw that in the video as well, National Institute of Urban Affairs, which is a technical advisory body to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs in Delhi, the Government of India. And they are currently undertaking a project since 2019 called the City Investments to Innovate, Integrate and Sustain, for the cities program funded by the European Union and the AFD. That's why, I mean, I'm underlining that again. Again, a bilateral agency comes in here. The whole methodology, there were 12 cities to begin with, and now they're going to go into the second cycle. It was through a challenge program, and the whole objective was that the cities were going to participate, identify their areas of intervention, of which historic cities or historic areas was one part of it. Green and blue infrastructure is a very strong part of it, and public placemaking is a very important agenda of that particular program. And on that platform, what Government of India or National Institute of Urban Affairs is trying to demonstrate to the local government is that the critical role of professionals, of interdisciplinary professionals, a methodology towards project, preparing the project, what are they called, the DPRs, the detailed project reports, which is, which is the engineering kind of a language, that it is very important that you need a multidisciplinary team, you need a comprehensive, multidisciplinary baseline data, community participation through instruments of stakeholder mapping, stakeholder engagement plan, user-centric design processes, and so on. So what Government of India is trying to train or improve the capacities of the city is through this program of cities. But like what I'm saying, it's a very small program. It's just 12 cities. Now it'll probably go to another 12. But if you were to look at a pan-India work that's happening, it's happening in infrastructure funded by bilateral agencies. So we need upscaling very, very quickly. And we need more conversations, more capacity building on platforms such as the one that we are all speaking on with UNESCO and UN Habitat and so on, to understand and bring the banks on that platform. Because we need to, the rate at which our cities are flooding, 1/3 of Pakistan is flooded this monsoon. And Rajasthan, Gujarat, these are bordering states. The floods are not going to respect international borders here. And I see this, we've got issues in the mountain areas, we've got issues in deserts. Bangalore was flooding this year. So there's a sense of urgency here. And capacities need to be addressed on I would say on very, very fast pace. And one way of doing that is bringing in experts and ensuring that there is a certain way of looking at, indicators of rigorous engagement of the experts at the ground level. It should not be fly-by-night consultants. It has to be people anchored for 2 to 3 years to help the local governments improve their work here.
Great, thanks very much, Gurmeet. We had a question actually, just a brief point of clarification on the role of INTAC, is it?
Yeah, so INTAC is the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, and this organization was established in 1984. And they've done a lot of work in the area of advocating the need for conservation and protection of heritage. But this is a kind of work that, there's a legacy of the 1980s, 90s, and so on. But and there's a very, very important role that they've played with chapters across the country for advocacy. But there, what I'm saying is that there is a gap between what we're talking about planning and historic cities and inclusive and resilient cities. That area needs to be addressed from within the system, as part of the governance system, whereas INTAC is a non-government organization, which is kind of working very well in the area of advocacy.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for clarifying that. Right, thank you. We're now going to, you've raised the point about climate and sustainability, and particularly, and you flagged the terrible impact in Pakistan very recently and currently. We're going to pick up on that relationship of climate and heritage, and we have a video that's been prepared for us. So we're going to play that, and then we're going to call on our last panelist. The video is Metropolis, Make a Choice to Change, Sustaining Humanity Through Culture. It was created by Melinda Ingram, Shari Askew, and Kathleen Brown from the Southern Cross School of Distance Education in Northern New South Wales in Australia. So we'll go to that video.
My name is Eve and I'm 12. I live in northern New South Wales, Australia. I love going to the Great Barrier Reef, and my favourite place to visit on the reef is Heron Island. Heron Island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site where you can find some of the most beautiful corals that you'll ever see. Climate change is a major threat, As temperatures increase, this causes corals to bleach and die.
So there's ways that we can make a difference at home every day just by simply making some sustainable choices, by wasting less and using less energy.
We have a lot of sustainable products, like our beeswax wraps to wrap my sandwich and the silicone wraps to bake on.
We do, that's right.
To make an impact, we need to change the way we think and act. Simple choices can make a big difference. By not wasting our food and composting our food scraps is a great way to help and make a difference to our environment. To reduce global warming, we need to give nutrients back to the soil.
Food waste is a big contributor to the climate crisis at the moment, and it actually accounts for 10% of the gas emissions that leads to global warming. So simply just by reducing our waste and recycling our scraps, we can make a difference. So how about we go and empty the compost bin?
It's important to choose environmentally friendly products in the kitchen, especially those that will eventually go into our waterways. By choosing environmentally friendly cleaning products and products that are made of natural materials that break down, like biodegradable sponges and wooden brushes.
You know, it's not always just about using environmentally friendly products like our biodegradable sponges and our wooden brushes. It's all about conserving energy as well.
We need to reduce our energy use by changing our habits. We can all be part of the solution to the climate crisis.
Hopefully in the future there are better designs to make people have better choices. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep telling my friends to flick off the light.
We need to stop wasting. We need to change our thinking that the earth is a bottomless pit of resources and start acting like what we do matters.
Okay, the video obviously picks up on some themes that we've discussed earlier, but also in the survey that that was done and that was distributed and that Jaehyun talked about before. On that theme, we're going to move on to our final panelist, Chae Wall, who's going to pick up on those on this topic. Chae is director of Flux Consultants, a boutique consulting and advisory business providing sustainable design and delivery expertise on sustainable buildings, urban regeneration, green infrastructure projects, and related policy development. Chae is also a lead expert for buildings with the Climate Bond Initiative in London and was the founding chair of the World Green Building Council and co-founded the Green Building Council of Australia. Chae, if you'd like to give your remarks.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you for the opportunity to participate. I'd like to talk specifically about the direction of sustainability regulation and its impact on the development of our cities. Policies, action, and transparency are all needed to transition the built environment to align with the needs of the 1.5-degree target declared in the 2015 Paris Agreement. The policy assessment we choose directly impact new development and intrinsically affect the perceived value of existing buildings and urban heritage. The imperative for climate alignment in our cities is such that we're now starting to see the perceived environmental limitations of the existing heritage buildings being cited as the reason why they should be demolished in favour of new unencumbered development. So ensuring the relative environmental merits of old versus new are properly valued is essential to challenge the premise that replacing the heritage fabric with new can be justified on the basis of the urgent climate change imperative. In recent years, there has understandably been significant policy intervention in energy efficiency for new buildings. However, we had not made significant progress in reducing the impact of the construction of new buildings. The production of concrete, steel, and other construction materials results in substantial greenhouse gas emissions, but currently these are unaccounted for in our planning policies. This is complex to measure through the supply chain, so not easily dealt with and essentially been assigned to a too hard basket. This resulted in a regulatory bias towards new buildings. New buildings are seen to be the solution to a climate-focused future, and existing buildings are seen to be laggards and unattractive. The need for simplicity in regulation of energy efficiency has also devalued built heritage. Regulating improvement in installation or equipment efficiency is easy and convenient, but calculating the benefit of good passive design, vernacular architecture, and suitability for climate is complex. So these aspects are largely ignored. The result is that our best practice energy efficient buildings now have unshaded, fully glazed curtain walls and look pretty much the same whether you're in Dubai, Sydney, London, or Mumbai. The regulatory focus on civil energy efficiency measures has devalued decades of climate-focused design. Heritage buildings designed to maintain health and comfort for occupants from first principles without the need for air conditioning, and that's significantly harder to adapt and reuse to meet contemporary standards. That's significant intervention and irreparable damage to the fabric of those buildings. A sole focus on energy efficiency also creates other problems as serious. Making buildings more airtight and more insulated means our buildings now overheat more in summer without air conditioning. Reducing the supply of fresh air to save energy results in more incidents of illnesses in our buildings and in other environments where mental tasks and learning are impaired. This smart glass, which has enabled the ubiquitous glass towers that populate city skylines to be deemed energy efficient, reflects all the heat away from the building and into the street canyons, which adds to the energy imbalance that causes the urban heat island effect. This results in urban centres trapping more heat than they can release and increasing overnight temperatures by some 4 to 5 degrees, meaning less comfortable nights, increased mortality risk, and yet more reliance on air conditioning. So the current approaches to regulation and labelling of buildings are not translating to real-world outcomes. In implementing the Climate Bonds Initiative's criteria for climate-aligned buildings worldwide, we've had an opportunity to review local regulatory schemes and building performance standards in all major capital markets and cities. What we discovered is that most current regulations and labelling systems around the world, no matter how well intentioned, do not correlate at all well with greenhouse gas emissions reduction on a building by building basis. We also discovered that most jurisdictions lack the necessary transparency in real world building performance outcomes to properly calibrate their policy settings. Unfortunately, this divergence of policy intent versus real world outcomes is becoming more pronounced, not less, as regulations tighten. So to summarize, the built environment policy reset, a built environment policy reset is needed to ensure new building stock contribute to our city's resilience and the heritage buildings' intrinsic sustainability values are recognised. We need to value the emissions impact of buildings. Regulation for ever increasing energy efficiency is irrelevant to emissions reduction. We should make all new buildings fossil fuel free. Decarbonising the electricity grid is the most economically rational way to continue to green our cities, and decarbonise electricity benefits all buildings equally. We need to regulate to safeguard passive resilience and human health, provide a tempering balance to the continued pressure to reduce energy. And we need to regulate to lower the impact of materials used to construct new buildings and hence increase the value of existing buildings. So this change to regulatory approach will provide a quicker pathway to net zero carbon in our cities, removing significant number of perverse outcomes associated with our current policy settings and level the playing field for our urban heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Che. So you've picked up on some points and some themes that the other speakers have raised, including that, I suppose, that the tension there between development and cultural heritage that Windu mentioned in relation to Jakarta and others have talked about as well. I guess one thing that that I noticed that's perhaps a little different in your presentation is you've emphasised the role of regulation, perhaps more than policy. And so certainly we've heard about the difficulties in some environments of using regulation or some kind of mandatory approach. Gamit, for example, was saying that. But from your perspective, you know, there is that difference between policy and regulation. You seem to place real importance on actually getting to the point of law and regulation rather than just policies that may not necessarily depend upon that kind of approach?
Yes, I think we have to. You mentioned my background in the Green Building Council movement, which is very much a voluntary approach, and the mantra there is industry should be incentivized to go further, and government efforts should be directed to funneling resources and incentivization towards those people to take the next step. But it hasn't worked quick enough or fast enough, and it doesn't necessarily shift the market at a rate which is necessary to address climate change. So regulation is critical. And it's important that in tackling that regulatory requirement, we balance the interventions to make sure we don't create buildings which are less healthy, devalue our existing stock, and we do it in a framework which satisfies multiple needs.
Okay, thank you. We might come back to the point about climate in a moment, but while we're on this particular topic, I might open to back up to our other panelists on this question about the use of law and regulation as opposed to, say, initiatives like funding or, as Che mentions, voluntary kind of self-regulatory initiatives. Does anyone have any thought on the respective roles of law and regulation on the one hand and those other initiatives on the other in your countries, in your experience? Any panelists want to contribute on this?
Yeah, I'm happy to go.
Great, thank you, Kameen.
Yeah, so I think for any initiative to be sustainable, it's important to get it backed by law. And I mean, policy. So while, like I said, Government of India would fund projects at the local level to whatever the learnings are from those projects, if you want to sustain that, you want to continue that, it needs to then get reflected in the laws at the local level. And then what that would entail is also that law would then enable structural changes in the urban local body. So if you're saying heritage conservation means recognizing community and therefore work areas and living areas and so on for the diverse community law, the urban local body would need a sociologist, would need a livelihood specialist, would need an economist, and so on. Now, those fundings would only be possible if what the intent is reflected in law, and therefore the urban local body creates departments and individuals, positions them in the urban local body to actually undertake and deliver. So when I look at the work of what Shanghai, the example of Shanghai, or if I look at the work that's happening in Penang, in Georgetown, and so on, and in Malaysia as a whole on heritage matters, I do believe that, I mean, they illustrate this point adequately, you know, that why law and policy and then law and then projects and programs need to have this upward, downward kind of linkage.
Okay. Thank you. Would anyone else like to contribute on this point?
May I, Derek?
Yes, Jihan, please do.
Yeah, thank you. Let me agree with the government concerning her points that law is very important because it is, source for the fund. I mean, based on law, the central government and local governments can executive budget for sustainable protection for the heritage. I mean, for example, the World Heritage Act recently adopted by the Korean government back in 2020. The central government asked for the implementation plan for the World Heritage cities to, which include, participation of local people and, like it also have some governance system involving the representative local residents as well. And it requires, the local government to plan some major projects to protect the heritage sites within their, city. So based on that local government's implementation plan, the essence of the law can be really implemented in the field. So likewise, that's why I mentioned that the intangible cultural heritage law also need to have similar kind of mechanism, asking local governments to, prepare some executive plan, very concrete plan to implement the act. So I think that is the beauty of the law. I mean, law can ensure the concrete follow-ups by the local governments and also the participation of the local people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jihan. Ying, were you going to say something?
I thought Mike is going to say next. Mike? Yeah.
Yep, great, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. It was really some wonderful presentations, and also about the tension between local, national, and also intermediary, the state, and the role of it. And I think that what we're looking at is the metropolis is going to provide then potential ways forward. I wouldn't say to solve the problems, but to address the problems. So if we're looking at the idea of changing habits, which was a very powerful message which came from the video clip, is that if we have climate change, we're going to work instead of from 9 to 5, we're going to work from 6 to 12. We also might find ourselves then being able to manage environmental issues. We need to have the metropolis to actually address these issues. So I think that the new understanding of heritage goes beyond the local community, and in such that we can address this in a more harmonized way, and to linking also the culture and nature. So it becomes a holistic approach of which we believe, therefore, the Heritopolis can provide. Over.
Thank you. Just before I go to Ying, I might just mention to our attendees who are not panelists that by all means put any questions in the Q&A, and we'll put those to our panelists. So Ying, over to you.
Yeah, well, just a quick point, and I very much agree with all the speakers on this point about the importance of law and regulations. I would point out that both for many areas of heritage and also many areas, cultural heritage, and also many areas of natural heritage and nature, the laws and regulations are very much in their infancy. And there is a great need for us to work with local legislators, and because a lot of these are in the gray area of regulations, which are bylaws or less. And unless these are both more formalized in the legal framework, and also to be better harmonized for a larger area, it will be very, very difficult actually for us to progress smoothly. So I think that'll be a good point, actually. I hope that would be an outcome from this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ying. Can I just go back to Che now for a moment, just to follow up? Do you think that in your experience, there are some countries that are doing particularly well in responding to these demands and the need to adapt? Are there kind of examples that I know we've heard a lot of variation and diversity across both in the survey and across people's presentations today, and different circumstances demand different solutions. But just on the matters that you raise, where would you see best practice emerging?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and there seems to be a divergence in approach between a transparency-led approach versus a pure regulatory approach. So one of the jurisdictions which I think the direction concerns me most is actually Europe, where they're regulating for what they call near zero energy buildings, and it's directing a lot of capital into things of limited return. And I don't think they've necessarily got a sector-wide view of a proper balance between the sectors as to where to invest the effort. At the other extreme, we have someone like the US, which has passed laws to allow people to access data. So we can look at a city like New York and Los Angeles, they have public disclosure of the greenhouse footprint of all their buildings. So it's incredibly democratic and buildings are judged purely on merit, not by some hypothetical construct of what's green and what's not. And that empowers financing. So from a financing perspective, banks know if their assets are low carbon performers and they can attract green bonds. So it's an interesting approach. And then on the issue of balancing objectives, I think, in particular with respect to heritage, it's probably worth mentioning the city of Sydney. They have ambitious climate change objectives, but they also have very good mechanisms for protecting heritage fabric. So they have a tradable floor space scheme for heritage buildings. So if you know how the dynamics of property development works, land is valued by how much building you can put on a block. And if you're a heritage building in the middle of the CBD, there's a lot of value in being able to build over that building. What the city of Sydney does is they allow that airspace, the floor space, to be traded to other developments. That provides an income to a heritage building owner, which can then be used for routine maintenance and additional cost of ownership for heritage building. So I think there's very good examples in lots of different places. I don't think any one place is necessarily integrated all together into a very comprehensive suite of policy tools.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got a couple of questions. I'll just flag one more before I go to them. To come back on something I think that Jihan and someone else mentioned, which was participation. I guess the concept of consultation and participation in formulating policies in this area. And I suppose that's particularly relevant given what we saw in the survey about the recommendation for the need in the future to take better account of marginalized residents and people from minority cultural backgrounds in formulating policy. So I wondered if anyone would like to pick up on that point from Jihan and has any kind of experience in your area that might inform that particular aspect. Jihan, if you're happy to just give us a brief recap to get us going, that would be great.
Thank you, Derry, for bringing this important, topic of involving local communities and also very marginalized people in the local governance. There are several good cases in Korea involving local residents. In particular, during the COVID-19 period, several Korean heritage cities, invited the local people virtually, having some kind of, like laboratory to exchange their ideas and also suggest, their ideas concerning the new project within the heritage city. For example, they suggested to have a kind of, some new route for bicycle, because, like young people in Korea started to enjoy the city using bicycle. So one of the residents, suggests to have that kind of system and also like having more facilities for the car parking, etc. I mean, from the perspective of the local residents, many things can be improved in a very concrete way. So I believe, that kind of like giving the floor to the local residents is very important, because local residents can have an ownership concerning their heritage city, finding some values, further values of the city, and and that makes people to involve more actively than ever. So that's why it's very important, because using that ownership, the protection of the heritage sites can be protected in a more sustainable way. Well, we don't have indigenous people in Korea, so I don't know much about the cases, but many other people here in the discussion can put some ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jihan. And I wonder actually if anyone's got anything to contribute on kind of method of doing that, on as well as just the importance of conducting that consultation and that participation. I know, Wenda, you mentioned, I think it was you that mentioned the importance of connecting with millennials. Taking those two points that Jihan's raising and the importance of involving younger people, the ways of connecting with younger people are obviously different from what might have happened in the past. So perhaps there's something. Gamit, I see you. Wenda, did you want to say something?
Yeah. There's a research recently done by students, PhD students, in my university, underlining what Jihan just said. I totally agree that the higher level of ownership and participation from the community will create the higher or the stronger effort of conservation. So there is a strong relationship between the two, and I would say that especially now with the active participation of the millennials, of the young people, if we give more space on that level of participation, that these millennials, the young generation, actually they play very important roles in using the the power of IT, information technology, the power of instant culture in terms of awareness, and the power of social media that they bring. I think there's really play a very tremendous role in terms of not just awareness, but also very creative, the creative way of not just preserving, but also the creation, recreation, among other ways of wider space on the meaning of conservation in the urban areas. More like indigenous, just now it was mentioned about the indigenous people, which Indonesia facing a lot of issues on this. And just recently, like for example, the rebuilding of the traditional villages, all over Indonesia. Just recently, it's like more than 250 indigenous villages, urban and vernacular villages, has been rebuilt by the young generation, and all these young architects, young planners, young community entrepreneurships, social entrepreneurships. I think there is a big wave for the millennials on this level, which I totally agree, in order to give more space into that, acknowledge their participation and roles.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gamit, do you have something to say?
Yeah. So to this very important question, my answer would be that, in several years, several decades of work in this area and kind of watching what is happening in the urban space as a heritage practitioner, I see that there is a lot of interesting learnings in bits and pieces from multiple programs and done by different agencies. There are a couple I'd like to share here. For instance, in India, the program of the smart cities, which is the ministry, the federal government with NIUA. the process of identification, see, there was a lot of money that was being given by Government of India, it's about 1,000 crores or something, and it was going to be 50% from Government of India and 50% had to come from the state government. So now that partnership in monetary terms was critical. The other part was that proposals had to come to Government of India from all these various states, X number of cities from each of the states. They were required to undertake a participatory process and do consultations with community groups, whether it was the resident welfare associations or university or government institutions or educational institutions, to undertake these consultations, which were partly physical and partly using social media and so on, for the citizens to participate and vote in that what is the area, which was called area-based development. There were two parts to the smart city. One is all for one and one for all, which is Pan City. So the city had to vote in which is the area which had to be more than 500 acres minimum, where they'd like all kind of infrastructure to be upgraded and quality of life addressed, and one area, one aspect which should be addressed at the Pan City level. So if I were to give you an example of Srinagar or Amritsar, the citizens of both these cities voted in their historic core, like the walled city of Amritsar, for area-based development. So all kinds of intervention, whether it was roads or water or safety or mobility or heritage, it was for them to kind of articulate that, look, it was for them to say, look, this is the area where we want everything done. And they identified that they wanted safe mobility Pan City. Now, this process was very interesting, but what I would like to draw your attention here is that while this process was very entrenched in community consultation, once the scope of area was identified and sent to Government of India for, then give the funding, the detailing, identification of projects and to develop the process of implementation so that the community is consistently engaged with the work, that was inadequately designed and implemented. So at one bit, there's a lot of consultation, but as a process, it doesn't exist. So finally, the engineers got into their motion and identified this building and this road and, smart city lights and this, that, and the other. That's where the ball dropped. And so, the other example that I'd like to share is a program of UNESCO, which was done from the year 2000 to 2007, called LEAP. I'm sure many are familiar with that. It stands for Local Effort and Preservation, where we as professionals were engaged. It was done by Bangkok. Dr. Richard Engelhardt was heading the program and probably conceptualized this whole program, where every year, once a year or once in 18 months, a group of professionals as mentors and city mayors with city planners would meet in one of the 12 World Heritage cities, and a certain theme was discussed, and the mayor would go back to the city and undertake a certain number of tasks, whether it was baseline data or some sort of a design in a particular area through consultations and so on, and bring it back to the forum after 15 months or 18 months. That 7-year rigorous engagement with the urban local body by UNESCO, providing a platform where the city mayor and the planners and the engineers were getting an exposure to a World Heritage City, were using this platform to have a dialogue with 11 other World Heritage Cities. They were moving around in the region of South Asia and of Asia and the Pacific, and there was mutual sharing, there was contribution, there was dignity in that relationship, and everybody felt as if they were contributing as well as learning, so as a two-way process. If you bring people into a workshop and say, look, we're going to improve your capacity, it's a bit of a patronizing kind of an approach. So here everybody felt that they were teaching also and they were learning as well. So when I look at the spectrum of learnings that exists in the region, there's a lot out there, but there's a bit from different case studies to be put together, and that wisdom, that collective wisdom, needs to inform where we want to go with this
Heritopolis.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gurmeet. Look, you've done something really really helpful there. You've identified a couple of initiatives that were successful and also pinpointed an aspect where a program failed in some respect. So I might, keeping in mind that we've probably got just a few more minutes before we move to Lee May for her wrap up, I might ask the other panelists if there's anything that that you'd like to conclude on that, in the same way that Gurmeet has just given us a couple of examples of something that was successful or something that actually was unsuccessful, but which actually shows the way forward on the particular matter that we're seeking to address. We've had some of these already, but maybe so very quickly, if panelists have something that they would really like to be noted, and that we'll pick up on in the notes that Lee May is compiling as well. So Wendu, is there anything that you'd like to add in terms of successes or failures that should be noted at this stage? Wendu, anything from you?
Yeah. Just now I was breaking up the so I turned off the video now. Yeah. There is actually a movement here for the young generation in terms of all cities. Yeah, in the northern part of Java, they call it Lasem. Yeah, where the Lasem is one of the what I would say like a tolerant city. Yeah, where the layers of religious influence form the heritage, like from Hindu influence, Buddha, and then Muslim, and then colonial, then post-colonial era or independence era. So the layers of heritage like that very much common in the old cities of Indonesia, because as well as you know that we have so many layers of religions with intertwined. You know, it's like in this kind of cities, you know, it's like a model of how tolerance actually, the spirit of tolerance. Now I like our colleague Gurmeet Ray mentioned about the collecting wisdom, you know. So this kind of thing, I think it should be given space in the Heritopolis, that Heritopolis should also encourage the collective wisdom as well as the model of tolerant city. You know, the one that I just mentioned just now is become the model, yeah, using the religious layer of it. And you can see, like for example, the pesantren, the Muslim boarding school using kelenteng, you know, the Chinese temple, as well as the Hindu temple, they being used by the Muslim boarding school. You know, all this kind of thing. I think if we can use this spirit of Heritopolis, become the or giving the chance of tolerant cities or tolerance, the spirit of tolerance space, I think in the future will be a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendu. Our other panelists, we just need to give a little bit of time for Lee May to wrap up. Is there anything that you think is important and we should mention? Do you want to mention just very briefly in concluding? So Ying, Yehon, Che, or Jihan, or Mike? Okay.
Yeah, right. I'm more fine. So I have no further to add. And so really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, we'll move to Lee May now, who'll give some concluding remarks to us, rapporteur.
So before I close and thank all of our panelists, I wanted to start with the point that we've just ended with from Wendu about the layers of heritage, which I find fascinating, particularly because Derek and I are joining from Sydney, Australia, we're quite proud of our multicultural societies. And very much in my research, I am looking at overseas migrant communities. So I think that if that is an idea that Heritopolis can take up, and I think that ties well into some comments that Jihoon made as well about the the strength that ideas of multiculturalism can have and collaboration internationally on some of these issues. I'll just go back through my notes. So our first speaker was you, Ying, and one of the points that stood out to me was what you said about the importance of human relationships. I often think as an Australian-born overseas Chinese, when I look at places like Shanghai and China, about the huge volumes of people that China has and can benefit from in their large infrastructure projects. So the fact that you outlined the difference that moving people around makes through infrastructure and transport and exposing people, I suppose, to different heritage was one that I think was very notable from what you said. Next, we had Wendu speaking from Indonesia, and you outlined the importance of the role of government, but also highlighted throughout your contribution is the role of millennials and the role of millennials being essential both from a participation perspective, but from a futures perspective. Here in Sydney, and I like the points you made about use of technology and creativity. Here in Sydney at the moment, because I'm not very good at sitting still, even when I'm here at the uni, I tend to wander a lot. The title of my project is A Walking Tour of Heritage and Environment, unsurprisingly. So here in Sydney at a Museum of Contemporary Art at the moment, we actually have a millennials style exhibition on about new worlds and identities. And I haven't had a chance to go in and take a look at that yet, but I think that exhibition will take up some of the ideas that you have raised. So following from Wendu, we had Jihoon from Korea. And one of the points that I've made particular note of was you outlined the importance of the participation of residents from an identity perspective at a local level and ownership for residents. Here in Sydney, Australia, because I've most recently been looking at our State Environmental Protection, State Environmental Assessment and Planning Act, I'm aware that our legislation throughout that act enshrines legal principles at law of community participation. But the issue here in Sydney is the implementation of those laws and also how those laws manage to reach the more marginalised migrant communities here in Australia. You also, Jihoon, outlined the importance of international cooperation, and Derek asked you some questions about competition, which I think sits interestingly with some of the themes of diversity and inclusion throughout this presentation, in the sense that while across Asia approaches and cultures are quite diverse, what you highlighted was that in the countries of China, Japan and Korea, for example, there are some overlaps and sharing of cultures, and that perhaps in future, one of the challenge for this project and for others internationally is how we can make those shared similarities a strength rather than a source of conflict. Next, after Jihon, we had Gurmeet from India. And one of the points that I've highlighted in my notes is the influence and importance of funding, but that funding on its own is not a complete answer, where federal governments, for example, aren't able to prescribe, and that's where the importance of having principles and programs enshrined in law comes out. You also highlighted the critical role of professionals and the importance of taking an interdisciplinary approach. I think that is a challenge for many countries in the heritage space and in the planning space generally, because of the wide-ranging nature of multi-skills and multidisciplines that are involved, from planning to heritage to engineering to legal and so on. We all need to work harder to work together for better outcomes. Our last speaker was Che War, and you highlighted, Che, the challenge that old heritage buildings present from a sustainability and a climate change perspective, because older buildings are harder to adapt and to reuse. But one of the initiatives you highlighted was work that's been undertaken here locally by the City of Sydney. Which sort of adds to the number of examples we, all of us as a panel, have highlighted as contributions in this space and initiatives for Heritopolis to look to in its work in future. So on that note, I would like to thank everybody for your contributions, and we would like to thank the attendees as well for attending this session, and to close. And we look forward to the outcomes from this Globinar and the two others in the two other regions. And I'm looking forward to reporting and doing my part with the two other rapporteurs from the two other regions. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Please stop.